Okay. So yeah, been 3 weeks approximately. I think the last recording we had was on last month, 27th or something. I don't know. Anyway, so bunch of stuff on my end at least. I finally got around to like finishing the changes I had piled up on the refactoring branch, and so those are finally merged in.
Oh, you put
Um,
them in the master branch now.
yes, it's all in
Okay,
master
good.
now.
I need to pull that.
Yeah. So, like, the biggest change I made there was mostly, uh, tearing apart all the mess that was, like, the context and the main window and all that, and the controller and all that kind of stuff. So, what I did was I created a sort of a hierarchy of things. So, at the lowest level, you have the context class, which does nothing but manage the OpenGL context and does a QGL widget. And it allows you to easily change the settings and stuff. And it also is responsible for like making sure that the context is only ever active in one thread at one time. So it takes care of locking and all that. Then above that, you have renderable, which is basically a class that doesn't really have anything to do with anything else necessarily. The only thing it does is after being initialized, it starts up a new thread, which then calls the render method in a specific interval. So it is basically responsible for taking care of frame stepping, so that you have, like, if you want to have a fixed frame rate, it makes sure that the frame rate is locked to that, or at least it pauses the appropriate amount of time. Or if you don't, then it like gives you the ability to check like what the last pause time was, what the last duration to calculate the frame was, and what your actual like recorded frames per second are. Then we have, if I can remember, even been a while. Like I started with this a while ago. Right. So next you have display, and display is basically building on those two. So it displays a context and a renderable, and then what it adds to this is basically it takes care of the appropriate overrides you need on the Qt side, so that like Qt doesn't interfere with things, and then it adds the paint method to the class and the setup rendering method that you can override to like put in your necessary OpenGL setup things. And then, but yeah, by itself, it doesn't actually draw anything. So you can instantiate the display instance and like show it, but it'll just refresh the screen every so and so, but it won't actually draw anything. The only thing that actually does that is then the main class, which I'm probably going to rename to something else at some point. I just haven't really been able to decide what yet. So the main thing what it has is it has a scene which it uses to draw things with. So you can enter and remove like units from there. It sets up a controller and a HUD so that you can have like objects that draw onto the HUD instead of the main 3D layout. And it has a setup scene method that you can use to specify like what kind of instances get loaded when the scene is first set up. And of course, it also takes care of like hooking into the scene's event loop so that it calls that and processes events and stuff. It also, aside from just being a superclass of display, it also includes full screenable. And what full screenable does is basically just takes care of, like, it allows you to specify resolution and whether the window should be full screen or not. And then once you initialize it, it changes the resolution to appropriate size and makes it full screen if so desired. So that's a separate thing. Then you also have input handlers. So I finally figured out how to separate the input system into its own self-contained thing, so that that hooks into a general kind of event loop kind of thing instead of accessing a global variable like it did before. So that's now nicely reusable and encapsulated. And what else? Yeah. So yeah. Another really small thing I added is like a window class that registers itself globally with a name, so that the idea behind that being that if you have a window that you want to access, then you can just access it by a name it has, so that you can easily retrieve it from the REPL or wherever you might need to access windows that you don't have like direct control over. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you look into the controller class, it's now very small. Previously, it did all sorts of crap, like it did the frame stepping, it did like some kind of input handling stuff, and all sorts of other things. What it does now is basically it just has a hot paint method that paints some debug info, like the pause time of the last frames per second measured, and the current scene time, real-time thing. And it takes care of like doing the event mapping system, so that like events can be mapped to other things. And it takes care of the retention system, which basically remembers if a key is being pressed or something like that. So you don't have to like rewrite that kind of thing in your player instances. So you can instead just every tick event you can check whether a key is pressed or not. And yeah.
Where is that code? I
What?
can't find it.
What is what called?
The remembering the.
Retention. Retention.lisp does that.
Okay, I was looking at the input.lisp.
Right, input doesn't have that. Input just takes care of like mapping input events into the event loop. And then the retention system basically generically says, okay, I can remember certain kinds of events if I know what the on event is and what the off event is. So you have like it has a define uniform retention macro, which you pass like 2 event types and a slot, and then it basically remembers automatically that this key is being pressed, for example. There's some sample definitions for key, mouse, and gamepad down there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the macro right now. What's the other one? The define coupled.
What?
The coupled retention.
So define coupled retention, what it does is basically it gives you more control over it. If you look at the define uniform retention thing, it basically is just it's like a simplification of the coupled retention. Coupled retention basically gives you access to both situations. You have like 2 different cases, like the one case where an event comes in and you want to remember something, and the other one is an event comes in and you want to forget something. With the uniform retention, thing you want to remember or forget is the same both times, but with a coupled retention you can, like if you have events that have different slot names or need to have some kind of different processing, then you can like control that better that way.
Yeah, I see. And there's the actual retention definer, and yeah, it shouldn't be too bad to use at all.
Well, you shouldn't really have to use anything like define any retention functions anymore. You should only have to like use the retained function to check if a certain type and ID is being retained right now. So, for example, if you want to check if the Q key is being pressed, then you would check like call retained and then key, and as ID, I think just Q. That's in the input table. What the name of the button is? Yeah, it's just a keyword Q. So that's how that works. The retention system itself doesn't do anything really. It doesn't know how to issue events or anything. What you have to do is call retain event yourself, and that's what the controller does. So the controller is actually the one that then maps all the events into the retention system.
Okay, I see.
And yeah, the main thing, like the main clause, just sets up the controller and the HUD. The HUD now is also interesting. I finally figured out how to do that. What it does is basically, since we now have a workable scene graph that actually makes any kind of sense, scene graph now has the ability to recognize when something within the entire tree is added or removed at any point in the tree. So it doesn't only know it when it's at the root like it was before. So now, whenever something is entered or when something enters or leaves the scene graph anywhere within it, then we get an event for that. So the HUD intercepts that. So it like checks whenever an entity is entered into the scene graph, and if it's a HUD entity, it enters that within itself. And then when it's drawn, it draws each entity with a special paint method, so that you can like reuse the paint method to draw onto the HUD and have certain entities. Like for example, if you want to have player display certain parts of the HUD, you can make the player a subclass of HUD entity and then add a paint method that specializes on the HUD and draw your stuff that way. Yeah. So that's all fine and good. Like the controller does that. Like it's if you look into controller class, it's a HUD entity and it has a paint method specializing on the HUD where it does its drawing stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually been looking at the HUD right now. Here's the enter even. But yeah, there. I somehow my eyes kept like skipping paint.
Oh. Right, so that's that pretty much. The HUD builds on the layered set, which is like a sort of a class that just can represent an arbitrary amount of layers, 2D layers, the idea is. So you could also use the layered set, for example, to represent 2D scenes if you want to do
cool.
kind of stuff. Yeah. Then I also fixed some bugs naturally, but nothing major or really interesting. I only got it like to actually run again yesterday after many weeks of making changes without having the ability to test any of them. Yeah. That's it from my side in terms of things I've actually done. So what have you been up to?
Mostly work. And of course the map generation.
Right. So what have you done there?
Well, it still needs some experimentation, but right now it just generates some noise. Noise images of certain sizes and then blends them together. But it still needs like one full resolution noise map because it doesn't do that right now, and then the smaller ones should be colored so we can get some. When they blend together, there's some color to it, and then you can, how should I put it, actually have differences in the world.
Okay. So how do you like? How is such a noise map then transformed into a terrain? What's the idea behind that?
Each pixel is one tile.
Oh, okay. So what does the color and the tile indicate?
Well, that depends on what we rule them to indicate.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's some, as I said, there's some experimentation that needs to be done with it, and
I was actually more thinking of something like using the noise map as a sort of a height map, but then just using a certain amount of threshold to define where the walls are. So that you will basically clamp it down to a certain threshold, and everything above that is solid, and everything below that is like possible.
sure, that's, as I said, that's part of it. But the colors would, there's more like different kind of terrain, not just passable and unpassable.
I don't know. I thought we like what we did. I'm not sure anymore what we decided actually.
Well, we'll need to see what happens when it's working.
I thought we mostly wanted to avoid like major height differences or like terrain that goes upwards and downwards and stuff.
Well, of course.
Right. So what else would you use all that information in the noise map for, except for building walls?
Well, building different kind of walls.
Hmm. I'm not sure if a noise map is the best way to decide that though.
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about what do you call that, where you pick one point and then uh, random like directions from
Oh,
it and
random
fill
walks.
out.
Yes.
Yeah, random walks and use that to build the different kind of zones and use the noise map for the walls, as you said. But I haven't. I just need to see what kind of results it gives first.
If anything, if you want to use noise maps, I would think that you use two different ones, like one that is like more detailed for just the walls, and then having one that's upscaled a lot over the entire map that decides the different regions depending on like again a threshold or a region of uh like how bright it is. It decides what kind of region it is.
Yeah, that's part of the experimentation right now, since I have made the blending code already.
Right. I don't like you also said I think that you like looked around for different ways of actually generating maps and stuff. Did you find anything interesting there?
Not really, they're all being so are like really what I have known already, somewhat. Just not exactly how they're done, but I know the basics of them. But
So what kind
I'm
of
certain.
techniques are those?
Sorry.
What kind of techniques are those? Because I've never really read up on this topic, so
Well, random walk is like there's few different ways to do it, and like one is to make the edges with the random walk, and other is to build from inside out with it.
mm-hmm.
And the noise maps are one thing. Then there was one that's just about removing blotches from the map, like first generating something with noise and then you remove parts of it. So
Right. That sounds kind of like one of the ideas I had, where you sort of like have all walls, and then you just cut out circles along a certain line or something randomly
yeah,
offset from that. Right.
I just mostly have been wanting to find something that like you can use to generate procedure. How do you say it?
Procedural?
Yeah, like when you walk closer, it just generates the nearby areas.
Hmm.
But
I don't know if that's a good idea still.
yeah, it's not in general, but I just really like the idea.
I mean, no, it can work for certain games, but probably not ours, because like we need to have like from the idea we have so far, which is again to reiterate is basically you have a central area where you have your village, and then you have several other villages around it that you have to reach by going through a somewhat straight connection to there. And then, so since it's not just endlessly generating that kind of terrain, I don't think it's a good idea to procedurally generate it as you go along. You would have to have more control over it, so you have to like generate it at one point once you enter it, and then have it fixed from there on out.
Yeah, this is very true.
I don't suppose you saw anything like the other thing I suggested, which is basically have start out with a line and then start like adding, like splitting the line up at random intervals and then mutating these the line along these intervals randomly again. So you would get some kind of randomized controlled path, and then from there sort of expand it outwards to get a region that you can walk through.
Sadly, I haven't found really much on it, but
I think that might be an idea worth exploring, except for the problem that this kind of approach doesn't allow for like intermediate sections. You would only get a hallway, but nothing like blocks inside the hallway or something like that. It's not something the algorithm could generate. Right. So, what else? I had a thought on something, but I forgot again. God damn it.
yeah, happens to me too all the time.
Oh right, yeah, I remember now. It's on like map generation, or not map generation, but saving, and generally just map representation. I think I got that mostly figured out now, so I can move ahead on implementing that. My idea currently is as follows. So, in order to differentiate static elements from dynamic elements being those that need to be saved because they can change over time and you want to retain that change. Static elements are like loaded from a map file, and they're loaded into the scene inside a container object that has a link to the map file it was loaded from. Then so basically, this allows you to have the distinction between what is static and what is dynamic, but you're not limited into like having one static bulk. You can have as many as you want from different maps simultaneously. And then what the save system actually does, it traverses the scene graph and checks if a unit is of a certain class, like maybe savable or perhaps the opposite, not savable or something. And if it determines that it is savable, then it figures out a way to represent, like construct some kind of form that creates a new instance of that object that is properly initialized with everything, and then saves that to file. And obviously the map container being a thing that isn't savable, so it wouldn't. Well, actually, it is savable, but it is savable in a way where it doesn't traverse deeper into it. So the map file would only save a reference to load itself again. That way, you basically retain in the save state which static maps were loaded at the time without actually saving all the objects within them. So that's pretty much how I'm going to probably go about it. I also have an idea about how to handle like the problem with how do the objects specify which kind of attributes they want to save. So what I want to do with that is have an append generic function. So like generic functions in Common Lisp, if you don't know about this, they have different kinds of method combinations. Method combinations also can decide how the result of a method call is computed. And there's several kind of different method combinations available by default, aside from the standard one. And one of them is append, and what it does is basically calls all the methods in sequence and appends all the results from them together. So what I can do with this is basically have an append method, generic function, append generic function that is like instantiation arguments or something, and then each class can define a method on that and only return the arguments that are specific to it. So, for example, we have I think we have a locatable entity or something. Located entity? I don't know. Let me check real quick.
Yeah, I think so.
Where is that stuff? Not in subjects. Where is it? Outputs, right. So we have a located entity, and what it would do is have a method that just returns a list of like the init argument location and then its current location vector. And for the oriented entity, you would have the orientation at the up, not like serialized like that. And for the rotated one, and so on and so forth. So at the end, when you have a class that combines all these superclasses, it automatically gets all these necessary initialization arguments saved off. So that way it's handled generically without having to like repeat that kind of information over and over again.
Huh. So you have save states.
Pretty much, yes.
And here I was thinking that we would go with save points.
What's the difference?
Now, with region RSD. Actually, yeah, I could use the same method as saving the state, but oh well, yeah, this is much better.
You sound very tired again.
I am.
I mean, this is more like this kind of system is intended as a sort of a generic lowest common denominator fallback case.
Yeah.
So that if you start using the engine, you just have the thing ready and you can start using it. If you need something more sophisticated, more efficient, or tailored to your needs, you can also always just disable it and implement your own version of the thing. I talked with Baggers about that real quick. I'm not sure if you read up on our conversation in IRC about it, but apparently what mostly game engines do is almost always a tailored system to work with their game, unless it's like a very generic kind of thing, like a fucking point and click adventure game or a fucking visual novel where the state is very clearly defined in what kind of inventory you have, where you are, and where you are in the quest line. But yes, for something like what we have right now, where we have no assumptions whatsoever about what the game is, we need to save a lot more information than that. And I think a system like this will be probably most appropriate. It's going to save a lot of shit we don't need. Like, you don't really need to save the orientation on all objects all the time. It doesn't really matter if that resets if you reload it. But, yeah. After this, I can actually finally start working on a usable editor so that we can start, like, actually writing maps and stuff within the game engine. But for that, I need to figure out how to make a camera that allows you to free roam around the place, and how to like make things clickable and that you can move them around and all that. So that's going to be quite a bit of work to get done. Yeah. Do you have any more input? Any more thoughts or things?
Nothing comes to mind. You've been pretty throughout with this. And just need to actually get something done by myself. I mean, you've been doing a lot.
By far not as much as I would like. It sounds like a lot, but really it's much less. I had like a really short spree of activity like 3 weeks ago, and since then I haven't really done much. I've been mostly like fucking taken up by studies.
Yeah. When my vacation starts in a week,
Oh right.
all I will have is studies. I have an exam at the end of it.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
When's Ludum there again?
5 weeks.
5 weeks.
At
Okay.
the end of next month. I'm thinking of using trial to make something small instead of like we could make some kind of a test game to see how it works well.
Sure, I guess. If we have the time, I don't know, dude.
Yeah. Well, at least the exam is fast then for me. If I get through it at least.
Right. Hopefully you can pass your exams without much trouble.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it from my side.
Yeah.
Any
And I want to make
what?
that sand simulator to work.
Oh, that thing. Why did you start that?
I don't know. I just started it some point like long ago and then left it laying around.
Okay.
And then I found it and I wanted to make it work.
Alright. Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's a good half hour for a podcast. Devcast, whatever cost. Next time, hopefully, we'll have some results with map generation, or at least some more ideas. Maybe save things. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
All right.